Good morning. It's time for Right Time Radio. This is Lynn Donovan. Sue, my co-host, is still out of town, and we've got Tay with us today. Hey, Tay.
Normally.
Yeah,
I'm here usually. Yeah.
I don't know.
Pushing everybody's buttons
and Tay at the same time.
Yeah. A little unusual this time, though.
It is a little unusual. We've got a shorter show today, and we're looking at just doing some new formatting. So we'll see what happens.
Figure out how it works. Yeah.
Today, what I get to do, and I'm kind of excited, is because I just had a book come out on Monday.
Oh, cool.
And it's called the series is called The Matchmaker Mix-Up. And the premise, the premise is, it's back in the late 1800s. The premise is this lady, this elderly widowed lady, has a very exact, precise system of matching boys and girls together to get married. She has a 3-page questionnaire that they fill out. She puts it together. She puts it on little index cards, gets them all filed.
Wow.
And one day her cat got into the file and threw it all over the floor and proceeded to play with the index cards.
Okay.
So when she saw that, she basically had what my aunts would call a heart spell. And fainted and went to bed for 3 days. And her granddaughter came along and just kind of scooped them all together and put them together and sent out the matches. So needless to say, the matches are a little mixed up.
Okay. Well, there's a good premise.
There you go. So the name of my book is Matthew's Wild Mountain Bride. It is set in Canyon City.
Oh, okay.
So Matthew Strickland is his name, and I'm giving you a preview because I'm jumping kind of in the middle of the story because it was just more of a fun section that I wanted to read.
Sure.
So Matthew Strickland owns a transportation company because, as you know, when Canyon City started, we were transportation, we were supplies.
Yeah.
So his father, who was very rich in New York, decided, need a transportation company. Son, go to Canyon City and establish this company. Well, he missed home, which was New York. And so he wanted to find himself a bride that would be from the East, a refined woman from the East.
Prim and proper.
Yes, who would come and kind of make a home that he was used to here in this wild, wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Only he gets Denisa McLeish from the holler in West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
She can skin a critter faster than you can say what's for supper and have it on the spit ready to eat. Those are her skills.
I know that.
That's true. Not quite what he was expecting. So she has come to town, and he has taken her to his home where she is getting ready to go to the church for their wedding, because mail order brides typically marry the minute they get to town.
Okay.
And that's where we start.
Okay. Take it away.
Just then, a tap came to the door. Miss McLeish. I love the sound effects.
I couldn't resist.
I love it. Miss McLeish, Mrs. Brown spoke softly. Yes, ma'am, Denisa answered. Do you need any help? Oh, no. Well, yes. Denisa stood and wrapped in a towel. Mrs. Brown opened the door and peeked inside. What is it, dear? I'm afraid I spilt the water. I need a mop, I suppose. Mrs. Brown's eyes dropped to the floor. Oh, don't worry about that. I'll clean it up. Do you need help getting dressed for your wedding? Denisa considered her offer. No, I think I can do it myself. All right, dear. Just call me if you need anything. She stood back, holding the door open, and allowed Denisa to leave the room. She padded to the next room. All she had was that was fancy enough for a wedding, was that purple traveling gown. Granny Goss had made her a day dress, a night dress, and a dressing gown during the time Denisa had stayed with her. The purple would have to do for her wedding dress, and a Sunday go-to-meeting dress, and anything else that might do until she could relax enough to put on her clothes that she loved and felt most comfortable in, her buckskins. Would she ever be able to wear her mountain clothes again? Would Matthew send her back home if she did? Granny Goss suggested she burned them, but Denisa just didn't have the heart. Matthew had said if she planned on buying a new wardrobe here, and that was what Granny Goss had suggested too. But Denisa didn't know the first thing about talking to a tailor. Would the general store have anything she could purchase? She had a lot left over from what he had sent her. Did Matthew have the kind of money to waste on fancy dresses? Frustration built up sour in her tummy, and she tossed herself on the bed. This was a mistake. She couldn't keep up the charade any longer. Maybe she should put on her buckskins, brush her hair up in a ponytail, and just tell Matthew the truth before they got married. Either he accepted her as she was or he didn't. But at least she wouldn't be lying to him. She pulled the towel around her hair and let the wet curls fall around her shoulders. She stood, padded to the carpet bag Granny Goss had given her, and looked inside. Her buckskins were at the bottom. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the purple traveling gown hanging on the chifforobe door. Mrs. Brown had taken the time to brush it clean. It even looked pressed. How thoughtful of her. Glancing at the door, she wondered if Matthew was really being patient as he said he would be while she got ready. Would God forgive her if she put on the purple traveling gown and married Matthew, and then put on her buckskins and told him who she really was? Would Matthew forgive her for deceiving him? There were ways of getting out of a marriage if it weren't what you thought it was when you said your I do's. Annulment, she thought it was. The word for getting out of being hitched. Would Matthew go straight to the judge and get one of them? She reached into the carpet bag and pulled out her mountain clothes to the top. Her doll had wanted her to be honest. Granny Goss wanted her to pretend to be city-fied lady. Granny Fagan just wanted her to be safe. Her shoulders rounded. What should she do? Miss McLeish? Mrs. Brown tapped on the bedroom door. Is there anything I can do to help? No. Denisa flopped on the bed, fighting the tears. I'm all right. The door slowly opened and Mrs. Brown peeked around it. Oh, dear. Are you sure you're all right? No. Denisa rolled over on her face and cried into the soft quilt. Oh, honey, I know it's overwhelming. I was a mail-order bride, too, once upon a time. But Mr. Strickland is a good man. He's kind and endearing. You're doing good by marrying him. Denisa peeked past her wet hair. Am I? Yes, Mrs. Brown sat beside her. Now, come on. What can I do to help you get ready? All I got is that purple traveling gown. Well, that's all right. A lot of mail-order brides stand before the preacher in their traveling clothes. Really? Denisa sniffed. You're lucky to have had a chance to freshen up. Now, what shall we do with your hair? Mrs. Brown fussed with some strands of Denisa's hair. Up, I think. Let's get it dried first. She walked to the dressing table and lifted a silver hairbrush and sat beside the hearth. Come, sit by the fire and we'll dry your hair. Then we'll help you lace up your corset. Denisa did as she was asked and let her brush out her hair as the fire blazed in a small hearth. It felt good to let someone else make the decision and lead her around. Heaven only knew she didn't know what to do. Let's break for commercial.
All right, sounds good. Perfect timing. We'll be right back.
We are back with Right Time Radio, and I'm reading from an excerpt from my book that came out this Monday. The name of it is Matthew's Wild Mountain Bride, and of course it's available on Amazon for $2.99 for your Kindle. I don't have it in paperback yet.
Why not?
So, well, because we do an e-copy first and see how it goes, and if it's pretty popular, then we put it in paperback.
Because I have this befuddled look on my face. Okay,
whatever.
Whatever works. Right.
There's a system to my madness. There really is.
I keep telling people that, and they go,
I know, because they know me too well.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, back to the story. Heaven only knew she didn't know what to do. Before long, Denisa was strapped into her corset and standing in front of her purple gown. She slid it over her head and placed it into play and pulled it into place. Mrs. Brown adjusted the lacings and tugged at the sleeves and skirt until it was all nice and proper. Denisa sat and let Mrs. Brown do what she thought best for her hair. When she was done, Denisa put on her boots, which someone had polished, and she turned to let Mrs. Brown take a good look at her. A tear oozed from Mrs. Brown's eyes, and she wiped it quickly. You look lovely, dear. Denisa reached for her hat, but Mrs. Brown reached to stop her. It's a lovely traveling hat, but I have another you may prefer. She scurried from the room. Denisa waited till she returned. Breathlessly panting, Mrs. Brown re-entered the bedroom with a hat box. She opened it and pulled out a lovely cream-colored hat with a veil that could be pulled down over her face. Denisa smiled. Yes, that's perfect. Mrs. Brown smiled too, still panting, and helped Denisa pin the hat in place. Denisa stood and turned to the mirror. Oh, Mrs. Brown, that is the finishing touch. Thank you so much. She turned to the woman and hugged her tenderly. May I call you Ada? Of course, child, Ada croaked. Now let me change clothes and we'll be on our way to the church. Denisa followed her out of the bedroom and slowly entered the parlor where Matthew sat reading a newspaper, as though there was all the time in the world. Ada rushed through the room and out the back door, while Matthew lowered the paper and lifted his eyes to Denisa. He swallowed. Ah, there you are. He stood and buttoned his waistcoat. His eyes roved over her and landed on her veiled face. You look lovely, he swallowed again, darting his eyes to the back of the house. I suppose Ada is changing into her church clothes? Yes, Denise uttered. She too was having trouble speaking. The two of them stood awkwardly, not knowing what to do or say. Mr. Brown came blustering through the back door, speaking loudly, which broke the spell. Buggy's hitched and ready to go, Mr. Strickland. My missus will be along real quick like. He winked at Denise and then stopped suddenly, taking her in. He let out a slow whistle. You sure make a lovely bride, miss. He tipped his hat and turned to lead the way to the waiting buggy. She glanced at Matthew. He looked pale, but he smiled and put his elbow out to escort her outside. Soon they would be married, hitched for life, and then she could relax and let him know who she really was. She took a quick breath and stepped forward, taking his elbow, forcing a smile, and then glanced into his eyes. The veil obscured her vision a little, but even through the hazy tulle, she could see he was as terrified as she. Matthew stood stoic at the altar. Reverend Carson spoke in his usual pulpit-animated voice, repeating the words he had obviously said 1,000 times. He held a Bible but hardly looked at it, knowing the speech by heart. Denisa wore the same dress she'd arrived in, but Ada had loaned her a veil hat that changed the appearance of the traveling gown to a delicate bridal gown instead. She was even more beautiful than when she arrived. He swallowed hard and tried to focus on the Reverend's word, but his mind drifted to when he first saw her emerging from the train. His heart had skipped a beat. He expected an elegant Eastern woman, but Denisa was so much more. So much more, and what made him think of that? He couldn't say. It was something about the way she carried herself. She was nervous, of course, as a Miller bride would be, and yet there was something strong and determined about her that drew Matthew to her. He couldn't wait to get to know her better. Certain he would love every layer he found underneath that refined exterior. Reverend Carson said, "Repeat after me," and they did. He went on about defining marriage and love, quoted from the Bible, and asked if they had any rings. Matthew reached into his breast pocket and brought out 2 matching bands he had bought the day he made up his mind to send for this bride. His perfectly matched bride. Denise's eyes went wide with surprise. Had she not expected him to be prepared? They exchanged rings, sliding them on each other's fingers. He had guessed at her ring size. Suddenly, he feared he might have gotten the wrong size. Denisa was taller than he imagined, taller than his sister. Would her ring finger be as slender as Betsy's? Even more concern filled his chest when he couldn't slide the ring past her knuckle. She took her hand out of his, licked the base of her finger, and forced the ring into place. They both chuckled at the quick and effective thinking, although the Reverend looked offended. At last he said they were man and wife and gave Matthew permission to kiss his bride. Ada squeaked and sniffed, causing Matthew to glance at her. The next thing he knew, Denise had pecked him on the mouth and stepped back from him. He was so shocked he couldn't speak. Staring at her after such a bold move, he turned to the Reverend and back to Denisa. What should he do? Did that count as their kiss? Was it good enough to seal the commitment to the marriage? He had something more gentle, yet passionate in mind. Oh, well, there was no way to step toward Denisa and give her another, more proper kiss without looking like a fool, so he just turned, put out his hand to her and clasped her outreached hand and led her down the aisle into the afternoon sunlight. A woman screamed. An erotic clumping of the horse's hooves and the rattling of tack and harness resounded through the street east of town. A man yelled, "Run away! Watch out!" A wagon careened behind the horse, turning on two wheels, then slamming down on all four with a hard crack. Matthew and his bride paused at the top of the steps of the red brick church as the terrified horse ran wild-eyed down the middle of the dirt road. The wagon that the gelding was hitched to rocked and swayed behind him. Any minute it would turn completely over with the way the horse was swerving. The horse would be seriously injured if it did. Matthew recognized the wagon and the horse. It was one of Strickland's transportation company's steeds and carts. But where was the driver and the cargo? Matthew leapt off the steps, ran into the street, and in the path of the horse, he held up his arms wide. "Whoa!" he groaned. The horse reared on his hind legs. A sheen of sweat glistened across his back. The wagon's momentum continued forward and ran into the backside of the horse, startling him even more. Matthew's horse, hitched to his buggy, whinnied and shifted in the buggy rocking behind him. He, too, grunted in fear. "Whoa!" Matthew jumped in the air and grabbed the halter, hanging on for dear life. He came down hard on the ground with the beast. The horse tossed him like a rag doll, but he hung on. "Whoa, boy, it's all right." He kept cooing and soothing words to help the horse calm down. A man ran down the street. He had been the one who had yelled earlier. "You all right?" He ran up to Matthew and also took hold of the halter to help keep the animal on all fours. Checking the horse and harness, the man turned to Matthew. "Looks like some pieces are broken, but everything's intact." Hey, you want to have another
stop
commercial?
There? People like, what?
I know.
Okay.
Well, that's kind of a good place to stop where people are going, "No, don't stop."
Yeah, we're just right in the middle of it. All right, we'll be right back.
Looks like some pieces are broken, but everything's intact. The horse was calming, but still had the wild look in his eyes. He licked his big lips and breathed heavily, grunting and prancing in place. He didn't seem to be able to stop moving. "What happened?" Matthew called to the man as he stroked the horse's neck. "Dunno, boss." Matthew suddenly realized this was one of his men, Trent Bates. "I heard a commotion and ran out to find this guy running like the devil himself was after him." Matthew looked down the road where the horse had run from. "You suppose he's ran from Red Canyon Road?" "Dunno, I guess. This looks like the wagon we sent to Cripple Creek. I reckon he didn't even make it up Shelf Road." Matthew looked at the steps of the church. Ada and Axel stood clustered around Denisa, who looked not frightened exactly, more curious than anything. That seemed off. Most delicate woman would have fainted from this outburst. He turned back to his employee. "Trent, let's get this horse back to the livery. Give him a good brushing and check him for any injuries. We may need to let Benjamin Gloyd know, too. I believe we've been robbed." He glanced at his bride and servants. "Axel," he shouted to be heard from the street. "Yes, Mr. Strickland." Axel took a step forward. "Could you see the women get home all right? I need to go find my driver and see if he's..." Matthew glanced at his wife. She didn't look terribly affected by all this violence, so Matthew decided to say what he was thinking. "See if he's alive." Ada gasped and covered her mouth with her gloved hand. Denisa ran down the steps and stopped just a breath's gap from Matthew. "Do you need my help?" Matthew stared at her. "Help? My help? Your help? How could she be of any help? Did she even know how to ride a horse? She didn't know this area or the way to Shelf Road or any of that. How exactly did she expect to be of help? Looking down at her sea green eyes, he had a moment where all he wanted was to take her home and make her his wife. But that had to wait for several reasons. No, go home with Axel. I'll be back as soon as I can. I need to go before this trail gets cold. Do you understand? She hesitated, bit her lip. And then he could see the decision form in her stormy eyes. Yes, but be careful. She stepped back from him. Axel and Ada gathered her together and between them. Together they climbed into the buggy. His own horse was still jumpy. Axel took the driver's seat, slapping the horse's rump with the reins and headed toward the house. Matthew watched them pull away. Glad Denisa would not see him attempt to walk. His ankle hurt. Being slammed down by the frantic horse had done something to it, but he had to go find his driver. He limped as he walked as quickly as he could towards the livery. Trent and the empty wagon had disappeared inside the large barn. Matthew rushed inside. I need a horse. I think we're going to have to stop there. We've got enough time to talk about it. And then we can finish up the show. So, gosh, what a great show this has been. I love
short.
It is short. Sorry about that, folks.
We're having a... We have that new on the right side.
Yeah.
So we're having to kind of maneuver things around. So we're trying to work that out. We'll get that done.
Yep, no problem. But it was fun to be able to share one of my stories.
Oh, yeah,
that's one of my
always.
favorites. So I have to tell you, my daughter's name is Nisa.
Okay.
And her husband is Matthew Strickland.
Oh, funny how that works.
So when you know me, you're going to end up in a book. So you expect to be in one someday, Tay.
Oh.
Actually, you already have been. I told you this.
I think you told me that a while back.
I did.
Yeah.
You were actually a rodeo announcer.
Rodeo announcer. I did that on occasion, yeah.
That's right.
I got a couple
and your
coming
name
up.
was Tay, but I changed your last name to protect the innocent. And then I tell everybody on the radio it was you.
So they know. Never mind. You know who that is.
It was a book called Barrel of Romance, and it was basically about a barrel man.
Oh, they're an
gal.
interesting group.
And they fall in
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
Oh.
When he was older, so he was getting a little more where he needed to retire. You understand what I'm saying?
All too well, actually.
Yeah, because the barrel men get pretty beat up.
They can get pretty banged up, but there's some guys still hanging out there. Flint Rasmussen's a well-known rodeo clown and entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
He's, I think, in his early 50s.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he's still going at it. He's not quite as spry,
Sure.
but he's still doing his thing. So that's good.
I had to do research, of course, to get stuff right when I was writing The Barrel of Romance, and I was amazed at how much is like the everybody contributes to a plan for the older guys to have medical care and therapy.
Oh, yeah.
And even psychological type therapy because they get kind of PTSD'd. And, I was really pleased with what all was going on in that because they don't have health insurance because of the type of the work, and it's really rough work.
Well, I work with this one rodeo clown. He's a little younger than me, not a bunch, but I always make sure, I always give him grief. Just let him know we do have ambulance over here. They do have oxygen just in case you need to go over there. So, I
That's
give
great.
They do have like a little cardiac unit just in case you.
Yeah.
So I give him grief like that, but he's a good man. He's out of Wasilla, Alaska.
Oh, wow.
So
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Well, you learn fun things when you do research. So, and of course,
absolutely.
I've been able to do a lot of research on Canyon City and know what was going on. And you know what? I learned a lot of stuff from David Lynn Spencer, who we've had on the show several times.
One of my neighbors.
So so it's fun to.
I see her walking that four-legged terror.
The new one.
Yeah, the new one. I can relate because I have one.
You have a four-legged terror.
Well, yeah. Well, she's like the rest of us. She's getting a little old. She's not quite as spry, but
Right.
yeah,
Hers is a puppy, so he's pretty spry.
been there with that one.
He's ready to herd the cows, from what I hear.
Some of them are just they're just naturally just genetically modified to do it.
They
All right.
are.
Got
It's
about
amazing.
got about 15 seconds, then we got to say sayonara.
Well, I thank you very much for
you're
letting
welcome.
me have the show today for
No
30
problem.
minutes because we just packed in a bunch of action.
We did, absolutely.
We had a runaway
So we'll
horse
see.
and
Are we
everything.
going to do half a day Wednesday next week? Do we know?
I don't know at this point
Okay,
in time,
well-
so we'll find out next week.
We'll make it
So
work.
See you then.
Gorge Broadcasting, AM 1400, KRLN, Canyon City, Florence, and Penrose.